Hello. Guess who's back? Exactly. It's me. How have you all been? How was Christmas Eve and New Year's? I hope everything was great and you enjoyed it. First of all, I want to thank you for the support you've been giving me. It means a lot to me, and I hope things continue to go well. Today, we're going to talk about another episode of regular show that teaches us what not to do when our hearts are broken. This is one of those episodes that makes us question Mordecai's character and maturity. In this episode, not only does he experience an emotional breakdown, but he also ends up breaking another person's heart. This episode introduced one of the most important characters in the show, initiating a relationship that was significant not only for Mordecai but also for Rigby. If you watched the last video about regular show, you already know what I'm talking about. If not, go check it out because it's really good. Just click on the card on the right side of the video. Without further ado, let's get into the video. The episode begins with Mordecai showing Rigby the tickets he bought for the continuation of a movie. Rigby seems interested in the movie and suggests inviting Eileen and Margaret. However, Mordecai says he only bought 2 tickets and wanted to invite Margaret with him. Rigby accepts it without any issues. If you've seen the episode where Mordecai simply kills Rigby out of jealousy, this scene becomes ironic. By the way, if you want, I can make a video about that episode. Moving on, while Mordecai gathers courage to talk to Margaret, he sees a scene implying that Margaret is already in a relationship with someone else. This completely shatters Mordecai's psyche, turning him into something rotten and unrecognizable. His platonic love for Margaret ended up destroying him. He spends 5 days lying in his room listening to that song, while Margaret continues with her life normally. At that moment, Margaret had no idea that Mordecai liked her, much less that he would be so depressed about it. There's a video here on YouTube that explains well why you should always tell your crush how you feel. The video link is in the description or pinned comments, and I hope it helps. Later, Mordecai says,
"You don't get it, man. The love of my life is getting married to some other dude. Do you know how that feels?"
Something Rigby responds to.
She's engaged, so what? It's not like you guys are even dating.
Despite being quite arrogant on Rigby's part, Mordecai has to accept that it's the truth. He can't trap Margaret in a relationship that only exists in his head. Margaret has her life, and Mordecai has his. If Mordecai's life depends on Margaret, he's living it wrong. Rigby suggests he join a dating site, but Mordecai refuses. However, Rigby had already signed him up and described Mordecai exactly as he is. Mordecai thinks it makes him look like an idiot, but in reality, if you pay attention, that description allowed him to find someone who really matched with him, if only he hadn't messed it up later. You don't need to pretend to be someone you're not just to impress someone else. Sometimes, what you find uninteresting may be interesting to someone else. If you like anime, video games, or some series that you find strange, you don't need to pretend you don't like them. You need to find someone who also likes the same things as you. After some girls showed interest in him, he finally agrees to go on dates and doesn't even try to show the slightest interest. Many people think that to deal with heartbreak or something similar, you should simply replace that person, whether by going to parties or, like Mordecai, joining dating apps. The problem with that is you never really overcome that person. You just set aside your feelings and convince yourself you've moved on, which clearly hasn't happened. Feelings of resentment, envy, or even anger accumulate and eventually escape. This happened to Mordecai in the future of the series and can happen to you too. If you now wonder what the right way to deal with this is, my answer would be that there isn't one. There's no right way to do it, but in all of them, time is crucial. Distract your mind, learn new things, and, most importantly, take care of yourself. This can take days, weeks, months, or even years, and that's nothing to be ashamed of. After many dates, Mordecai finally meets CJ. She notices that Mordecai seems a bit down and asks why. Mordecai explains everything, and CJ understands, suggesting that they just be friends. CJ proves to be someone very fun and gets along well with Mordecai. She healed Mordecai's heart. He seemed to have stopped being that depressed mess and finally found his happiness again, but this time, away from Margaret. Mordecai ends up inviting CJ to go out, and she agrees. Mordecai meets Margaret on the way home and tries to avoid her as much as possible, but it was enough to make him depressed again. This brings us back to the point I mentioned earlier. Simply replacing Margaret in his heart would never work. He tried to ignore his feelings, and they ended up surfacing when he saw Margaret again. Vincent, already annoyed, says one of, if not the, favorite lines of mine from this show.
You don't have the right to be sad. You never even had the guts to tell Margaret how you feel. Listen, if you leave things the way they are now, you'll regret it for the rest of your life. Telling her might not change anything, but at least you'll have closure.
By the way, leave your favorite line or the one that marked you the most from any animated show in the comments. Mordecai is going to confess to Margaret, but before that, Margaret wants to introduce them to her cousin John. She explains that he has a new leg, and only then does Mordecai realize he had misunderstood everything. Mordecai invites Margaret to the same movie he had invited CJ to, but what he didn't expect was that CJ was nearby and had heard everything. At this moment, I feel sorry for CJ because she had shown to be someone who really cared about Mordecai, and seeing him simply describing their relationship as just friendship is heartbreaking. CJ has shown to have anger-related issues many times, and this time is no different. Truly, Mordecai is not obligated to fall in love with CJ, but simply ignoring their relationship to go back to Margaret is surreal. Sometimes it seems like Mordecai is a child and simply doesn't know himself. He is very unstable and doesn't consider much what others think. Part of this may be Rigby's fault, but that doesn't absolve him of blame. He continues to do the wrong things, and it took Rigby telling him what to do for him to finally explain everything. CJ calms down and says she's not interested in Mordecai's friendship, which honestly was the best decision. But knowing that later they end up dating is somewhat strange, but what can you do? Regular show has always been full of craziness. After things calm down, Margaret shows a bit of jealousy but refuses to accept it and ends up not going to the movies with Mordecai. And so the episode ends with Mordecai sitting in an empty cinema alongside Margaret's cousin. There's no denying that Mordecai was really an irritating character and once again gave reasons not to like him much. Part of the blame also goes to CJ, but you can somewhat understand her side. And so begins a series of episodes about their relationship. How did it end? How did it continue? I can explain in other videos if that's what you want. I love each one of you, and I hope you enjoyed the video. Hugs, and until next time.